Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Chuck Cornell. I work at People Science. Thank you for joining us for our presentation. It's 2011. Do you know where your new hires are? I would like to give a brief introduction about our presenting speakers. As a human resource generalist, Christine Nicholas made the move to recruitment in late 1980s when she realized firsthand the importance of a well-matched and talented workforce. Christine moved rapidly through the ranks of staffing companies, eventually leading to Open Options Employment Resources, which today operates 3 divisions: a local temporary and contingent staffing firm, a recruitment consulting firm, and People Science, a highly successful RPO, recruitment process outsourcing company. Christine's book, Creating Profit Through Recruitment, should be available in mid-year 2020. Elaine Orler, president and co-founder of Talent Function, has been implementing recruitment software for large organizations since 1993. In her 16 years in the industry, she has worked with both practitioners and solution providers to shape the way talent acquisition solutions are delivered. Elaine has taken an active role in over 75 recruitment software implementations across 15 different vendor platforms. Elaine has guided her clients through the evolutionary shifts in the market, such as the dawn of internet-based electronic recruiting, the proliferation of global recruitment implementations, and the revolution of social media platforms. This is an interactive discussion. Please notice the dialog box on the upper right-hand corner of your screen. If the dialog box is not open, click the red left arrow button at the top panel. Please post any questions you may have, and we will address your questions at the conclusion of the webinar. Without further ado, I'd like to introduce Christine to begin the presentation.
Good day to our many different time zones. I'm Christine. Thank you, Chuck, for such a nice introduction. I'll qualify that Elaine was not around since the dawn of time, just the dawn of the internet, since she's much younger than I am. Having a little chuckle here. So we've named this presentation, it's 2011, Do You Know Where Your New Hires Are? Because that seems to be the reoccurring theme around here as things have been changing within our country, within our particular company. And we've gathered this data, put it together, and said, as we look at 2011 and moving forward, with everything in a flux of change, where have we seen the largest success? What are the organizations that have been successful? Why have they been successful? So everything that we talk about here today is based on case studies and actual instances that both Elaine and I have been involved in over the last few years, most particularly over the last 8 years or so. So as we've been doing recruitment consulting, People Science has been doing recruitment consulting since 1997, we've chosen to look at the data that's the most recent to us. All right, so it's 2011, do you know where your new hires are? And we're having a little technical difficulty. Okay, an overview. So first we'll talk about, and let me just preference this by saying this is actually going to be a 2-part webinar. We have another webinar coming behind, although each webinar is its own entity. So as we said, where are the new hires coming from? We were also saying there really is not just one single solution. Anybody in talent acquisition today realizes that. But when we took a look at the continuum of great recruiting efforts, we first noticed that it starts with understanding it. Understanding where you are, what it is you want to accomplish is important. And today we'll start to talk about those pieces. And then our next seminar, heading back into June 29th, will deal more with logistics and specific microdata things that you can do to accomplish some very gallant efforts in recruitment. So an overview, nothing is constant but change. Where innovation intersects with ideas comes innovation. Then we'll look at common characteristics of success, obstacles, and solutions. At this point, that's where we'll talk about some of the case studies that we have in mind. We'll change the names to protect the innocent or whatever the case is. I'm going to give you specifics, and we'll tie them into those characters of success. The pleasure and the pain of technology, which is where Elaine will chime in if she does not chime in earlier. Then we'll look at the recruiting continuum, which really creates the foundation of how these good are published. And then we'll give you a brief overview of our self-survey, recommended readings and resources, and a quick glance at the next upcoming webinar. Nothing is constant but change. It's an old saying, but today even more so. So the question I would pose to you right now, if you can just take a second, you may want to write this down. 5 years ago, how many friends did you in fact have? Today, how many friends do you have? I understand from teenagers that without 500, you're a loser.
Well, that would be, and that's a perfect segue. Both of my kids are teenagers and both in high school, and we had the conversation just recently. My son was a little frustrated because one, my daughter has got more friends than he does, which is odd. And then the second is for any teenager not to have 500 plus friends on Facebook, they are considered questionable as far as a good friend. Unfathomable to me.
And even more unfathomable is that we keep up with their lives, which is interesting.
Or we think we do.
Yes, we think we do. This statistic totally bowled me over. 3 trillion pigs have been killed. 3 trillion pigs.
And I can actually tell you that within our family, and we are a multi-generational family, and my husband is classified as in the baby boomer category based on birth. I am Generation X. Both of my kids are Generation Y, millennials, and we compete as a family to get the highest score for Angry Birds. So we each, and I would actually even caveat with technology, each with a different platform. I happen to use my Droid phone. My daughter happens to use my iPad. My son prefers his iTouch, and my husband is using a tablet. So we have all worked very hard to find our own technology choice, but Angry Birds is an interesting way in which we've come together.
So how can Angry Birds, and it's interesting because in our next webinar we are going to talk about intergenerations, so going from boomers to X to Ys to millenniums. So as we talk about those, how does Angry Birds interact? And Elaine, what you just said is such a great point, right? Something that everybody has in common. But in fact, we had a baby boomer in earlier that when they saw this, they said, geez, I don't really know what Angry Birds is. And you may not, but frankly, I think I've killed about 1 trillion of these pigs in my spare time on airplanes. And I didn't know about this until December of last year. So this is how quickly this very popular, the most popular app for smartphones is. So basically, good ideas intersecting, such as the 2 slides that we just talked about, that constant influx of change is where we need to be, where we need to live. The last slide and this slide that we're talking about have come from a presentation by Franz Johansson. If you're not familiar with him, he wrote The Medici Effect. If you haven't read that, I strongly suggest you do. I don't think there's been a lot of study in innovation, right? You're either innovative or you're not. Well, these days we're learning that you can actually teach yourself to become more innovative. And if you aren't innovative and you're competing now in a global market, which we all are, even if you're only recruiting to your specific country, it's still a global market that you're competing in as far as talent is concerned. So that just widens the span of innovation. So as our entire globe becomes more innovative, how can you learn to be more innovative? So intersecting good ideas. So this top piece that we're looking at, let's just look at the top 2 pieces. The picture on the left of the top that Pam's nice enough to point out to us, this is actually a termite mound in Zimbabwe. The picture next to that is a high-rise, the high-rise right in front with the yellow strip at the top, which is also in Zimbabwe. The architect for this creative building was commissioned by the state of Zimbabwe to come up with a high-rise that could operate without air conditioning. It's pretty hot in Zimbabwe, you can tell by what the termites have done. So he quickly took a look around and spent some time and actually was inspired to build this building, which keeps 72-degree temperature year-round, day and night in Zimbabwe, and modeled it after the airflow system created by the termites to the left. Two good ideas melded together. Termites, filtration system. Interestingly enough, the termites have to build like this in order to survive, because this type of funneling condition under hot temperatures creates a fungus that they live on. Kind of gross. To the point, they've built out of necessity. We've learned from their necessity. Great innovation coming from intersecting ideas. Next, we have the woman to the left on the beach in the burqa. Very uncomfortable situation. And then next to that, the woman in the bikini. Those 2 ideas, combined by a young lady on the beach, created what is now called the burkini. Now, if you can imagine how many lives that piece has changed. Very interesting. 2 good ideas. Spandex and the type of materials made for bikinis, combined with the burqa idea, burkinis, which is, from my understanding, the quickest growing swimsuit segment in the entire world. And then just taking us back a few more years ago, most of us would remember that the Mac made a big comeback. Now Apple, the best known brand in the world, over there to the right, Pam, thank you. Colored monitors really started to bring that trend of state-of-the-art, fashion is popular, different generations combining, and that was in fact inspired by the candy M&Ms. All good ideas, all coming together, intersecting. So I strongly suggest you take a look at the Medici effect. So now we've got our heads open, we've got our minds open, we want to be innovative, we want to learn. Then we turned around and we said, okay, those are characteristics. Now what are some of the specific characteristics within these talent organization groups? And let's break them down into their characteristics, the obstacles that they face, and the solutions. So the next couple slides, we're going to talk about what the lead characteristic is, the specifics underneath them, the obstacles that they've mastered through, and the solutions that can be provided to those obstacles. All of this, again, based on these very creative groups. So characteristic number one, does not necessarily need upper management buy-in, often creates it. Let me just back up a second. So our first real characteristic here is clear leadership towards a defined common cause. So this commonality that we saw is that there was clear leadership that was defined towards a common cause. There was really good leadership saying, this is our cause and we're all getting on board with it. And then the first characteristic of that was that it does not necessarily need upper management buy-in. It often creates it. Very often we'll hear, and I'm sure you've heard, management won't do it, our board would never approve it, HR doesn't have that type of position, and that's our obstacle, old paradigms. So how do you get around that? In these groups, what we've seen is they create the plan, then they get the buy-in. They never settle for what they can't do. They create the plan themselves and get the buy-in. And in this day and age, and we'll be talking a lot about metrics throughout this entire program and the next one, knowing your dollars and knowing your cents. It's much more difficult to argue when you can turn around and say, based on the cost of vacancy, it's important that we take a second look at this and change the way we're recruiting, and I need a budget for it. Just one simple sentence. So these groups all have this gumption to get the plan done before they get the buy-in. Number two, the majority of the staff believes in the cause. All of them understand it. You notice I'm saying the majority of the staff believes in the cause. I don't think I've ever walked into one of these situations, I don't know about you, Elaine, where everybody is totally and completely 100% on board. But when we look at the most successful ones, we're back to the Ricchini. Sorry. So the majority of the staff believes in the cause, and most of them understand it. So when we take a look at this, what we're seeing is even the ones that don't believe it and aren't necessarily behind it, they understand the reasoning for it. And when they understand the reasoning, it's easier to get them to function until they become believers. Some of the obstacles that they've run into is total non-believers and wrong jungle. I'm just going to. So in order to, if you haven't heard this paradigm before, I'll ask you to just take a second and think for a second that you are in this jungle. And it is your job, along with your coworkers, to clear the jungle. So there you are, in the jungle, you're using a machete, you're using a backhoe, you're using whatever it takes to cut through the weeds and cut through this overgrowth. And then behind you is your manager, and your manager is sharpening machetes, giving machete lessons, telling you which way to go with the machete, telling you not to fight with your machete peers, giving you Blue Cross Blue Shield of Machete Land, making sure that everything is operating really well, and you're all moving ahead. Now the leader, or the leadership side of you, then does their job, which is to climb to the highest tree in the jungle. So now you climb to the highest tree in the jungle. Let's go back. So you climb to the highest tree in the jungle, and you take a look down, and here's your jungle. But the leader notices that this is the jungle you're supposed to be in. So now the leader yells down to the workers, wrong jungle, and all of the production people yell up, shut up, we're making progress. And that's our paradigm. Shut up, I'm making progress, right? The non-believers, wrong jungle, but we're all getting somewhere. You know, what's the definition of insanity? We keep doing the same thing, getting the same results, but we can't stop, right? We can't stop because we have to keep finding candidates. We can't stop because everything's moving at the speed of light. We have to keep going. We have to keep going. And it isn't until someone comes in and says, we're going to keep moving, but we got to make sure we're in the right jungle, and moves everybody to the right jungle, whether it's an independent person recruiting for one particular thing, who has to have their leadership hat on in the morning and the recruiting hat in the afternoon, or an entire department. That's a common thread that we see. They're able to always look at that bigger picture. So the solution? In your group or amongst your peers, align with believers. One of the common downfalls we see is that people will quite often spend more time trying to bring non-believers to the believing side. Well, the best way, in our experience, to gain the believers is to align with the believers, because believers will breed believers. So the more you can get them on your side, the more they're believing, the more people believe, the more contagious it becomes. The more contagious, the better the effort. Move on non-believers. Dispose them, put them in a less profile position, put them somewhere where they feel comfortable, in an initiative where they feel comfortable. And then last, certainly not least, advertise metrics and facts. That's another good way to get people on, get believers in them. If we accomplish this, this is what our company will look like. It's quite often, if you come totally out of the box and show what can be gained by gaining the right people at the right time for the right price and putting them in the right positions, the whole organization functions differently. Okay. Third point, under clear leadership, is the cause. Cause is understood throughout the organization, so everybody gets it. The whole company gets the value. Now, how do you do that? How do you say, we know if we bring customer satisfaction, we bring better people and we'll get better customer satisfaction, everybody in the company will be happy. Well, if you're in a company that has 200, 300, 400,000 people, how do you articulate that? Or you could work it in reverse. Each company, every organization that we work with, albeit small or large or mid-size, even small companies have initiatives for the year that they may not even document. Large companies certainly do a better job of advertising what it is the plan is. But each year, these groups, or throughout the year as these initiatives come up, we're able to align themselves with the business objective and to say, as a player in the business objective, this is what we do. So let's say, and I'll give you an example. So we had an organization that after 3 years of HR monitoring the progress of the accomplishment of these salespeople, they were able to say that they could increase revenue for the organization by simply adding another 1,000 people into that particular position. Now, the problem with that is that most of the people in the organization did not believe that that could happen. They just didn't understand how that could happen because it was a very difficult type of person to find. Well, when the entire company looked at them, or when the upper management looked at the metrics and said, this is a great idea, they actually named the program. So now everybody in the company knows the program. So now talent acquisition is recruiting to a program that's the #1 priority for that corporation for the entire year. So now what happens is a hiring manager wouldn't typically see a candidate, or didn't have time to see a candidate, or the accounting department that couldn't necessarily run your programs as fast as you needed them to be done. Now you're tied into business mission critical, and all of a sudden you move up the ladder. So communication is one of the obstacles you can run into. Buy-in is one of the obstacles you can run into. But if you can align yourself with these programs for the company, communicate your success weekly, and correlate the impact of the business, you'll have a win every time.
And I would love to add from the correlate the impact. I think there's a definite opportunity from a talent acquisition perspective today where if you think about the minds of the leaders of each of your organizations, we use a paradigm of the CEO's mind. There's always two aspects in which you have to balance in a CEO capacity or in a strong leadership capacity. One is the operations, what's happening from an operational perspective, and how can we improve operations, which typically includes decreased cost, better return on investment, those types of things. But the other side of the mind is what can we do to grow the business? What is competitive advantage? What is differentiating about our organization to make us great? And the more you can align talent acquisition initiatives, recruiting initiatives, and the example you gave of the sales force, et cetera, to the side of the mind that is about growth and about revenue and about future strength, the more opportunity you're going to find to be a part of that side of the business, versus where we tend to get categorized in many organizations that I've worked with. The categorization falls into your operations. By default, you need to cut 15% of your budget, and it's really difficult to move from a cost containment support model to we're about revenue generation, we're about growth and development. And talent acquisition has the ability to do that just by starting to think about the competitive differentiation of the talent you bring to the business.
Well said. Well said. And that's it. And our next slides are going to talk about some of that again, Elaine, so please do jump in. So our next characteristic, optimistic vision. Boy, I've seen some real optimists against some big obstacles in the last 14 years. I'm laughing because our operation person, every time I say that, she looks at me as, because it is, Elaine, to your point, HR has a stigma that kind of comes with it, unless it's a very educated group, and even at the highest groups, and even with the I would also mention that as things are changing, there's a lot of movement at the top these days, right? We see CEOs moving, we see chief officers moving, we see our own HRO groups moving around a lot. So as that kind of fans around, the believers in HR are kind of circulating a little bit more, but I don't see tons of them coming in at the rate that we'd like to see them. Although I would say comparatively to even 5 years ago, the status of human resource and talent acquisition is climbing quickly. So optimistic vision is very, very, very important. The first characteristic of that is the belief that the business objective can be met. I'll go right to the obstacles to help explain this, but the history of failure. So if the organization, whether you've been there or your team's been in place, has a history of not being able to get the kind of people they want, and by the way, you can bring 10 good people to the table, and the one squeaky wheel, the one that's out of place, is the one everybody says we can't get any good people. You've got some of that headset to get by. Creates this fear of expectation. So if I tell them I can get these people and I don't get these people, this is a disaster, right? So the business belief is, we're not going to overproject because we're afraid that's not going to happen. And then another portion of that would be the disconnect to the business. So the belief that the business objective can't be met, the obstacles are history of failure, fear of expectations, and a disconnect to the business. So what are some of the solutions to that? Transfer some of the non-believers out. Move them around. Clear planning and mapping. So would you ever venture into aligning yourself with a business and making an objective if you didn't have a clear roadmap? One of the key things that we see in talent acquisitions that succeed is there is a very well organized business plan, including very good metrics that apply a lot of security to this, right? It used to be the belief, and it certainly is to a certain degree still very much the belief, that we're subject to what the market has. There aren't enough chemical engineers. There aren't enough chemical engineers, then we can't hire enough chemical engineers. And I think that once you say die, that is exactly what happens. But we've seen time and time again where that's been counter-applied. So keeping really, really good metrics and having a little faith in those metrics changes this. Make a believer where there isn't a believer. And this is a good example that I'll give you. So we worked with an organization that their board, this is a global organization, well over 300,000 employees. Their board, kind board that they are, wanted the company to get to a 50% diversity population, and most of the employees are in the United States. So over a 2 to 3 year period, they were able to accomplish that. Then the board came back to HR and they said, this is great, but there are certain sectors that we're still not at 50%. And one of them was high-level security systems sales globally. And the prerequisition for that position is that you have to come with a book of business because you can't create it. You have to have 10 years experience and you can't create it. So in that sector, it was predominantly white males, no type of protected group, no type of diversity. They ran the metrics. HR went out and ran the metrics. They increased their efforts, and they came back and built that group to 36% diverse. Not a bad number. They go to the board. We've got a 36% diverse workforce in that group. The board says, great, but we want you to get to 50. So HR comes back. They go to 2 consulting houses and come up with a metric to show evidence that there simply is not enough people with that talent set to qualify for that job. But let's go back to Machete, because what they were doing is they were actually recruiting from schools, training diversity, only looking at new hire diversities that could move into that segment, really cleaning their slates up. They did absolutely everything they could. And that's when they talked to us. And we said, you are absolutely doing everything you can. And they said, we have an idea. Why don't you do the recruiting and keep your metrics, and then we'll take those metrics to the board and say, these are not just simple metrics. Here's the names of the people that we spoke to that just aren't ready for the position yet. So we did a blind study, and we put a group of recruiters on it, told them what the initiative was, really just to find these candidates and how to be a diverse slate. Our intention at People Science fully was to come back and give them the good metrics to support that 36 was really, really, really good. And by the way, we included a lot of competitive data in there too. Well, in fact, our group came back and, surprised, 3 weeks later told us they had a plan, and within 3 months, that division was over 50% diverse. Now, had we listened to ourselves and kind of given it up, or had the board not been persistent, we wouldn't have found what we were looking for. It is a global world. Things are different. There are different ways of doing things. And I think that we all sometimes get in our own way. But once you really learn how far out of the box you can come, it's amazing. And that story actually happened to us 4 years ago, and we still hold on to that story in every effort that we have to help get us through. And you'll be able to see the case study. I believe it's on our web. Is it on our website? Yeah. If it isn't, it will be up in a day or two. So, solution. Move the non-believers, clear the planning and the mapping. Takes a good plan. Make sure that you look at your successes and that you announce them. Okay. Identified, no, we're still on that slide. Okay, identified that the incoming was not the only challenge. Well, if HR could just, if talent acquisition could just get more people. Let's just take more people, because more people will be the answer. This is one of the most common mistakes that we see. Just more people. Now, the real smart talent acquisition people say, well, maybe it's not just all the people. I'm going to give you another case study. Working with a large bank, and the bank said to us, we just found out today, through all our metrics, that in order to meet our number for mortgage processors this year, we are going to have to interview every single mortgage processor in the U.S. This is very interesting. So they called us and we said, well, yeah, at the rate you're going to. So we went over some things and they were able to take a look at their process and find out where the problems were. But the interesting thing is the business was continuously telling them, just get us more people. Other HR people were saying, just get more people. Their uplines were saying, why can't you get more people? Well, you can look at every mortgage processor there is, but it's not going to get you where you need to go. So it's identifying that it isn't just the front-end pipeline. Obstacles. Belief that more incoming was the only challenge. Hiring managers not urgent about hiring. Another issue. I want to see 7 people. I don't want to see 3 people. So the solution, metrics, process examination, identify your bottlenecks. We'll be talking about that in a few minutes. Establish relationships. One thing that I've seen throughout is that when the business is aligned with HR and the relationship is good and the trust factor is good, everything goes well. Relationships will get you a lot further than you may anticipate. Third characteristic under optimistic vision is that they're able to punch through bureaucracy when needed. So an obstacle to that is nobody wants to step on anybody's toes. We don't. That's not who we are, right? We just don't want to step on toes. HR typically does not want to bang on the door and say this has to be done. And then you run into these protective protocols. You've got to talk to Harry, who has to talk to Sally, who has to talk to Ann, and it's got to go back to Sally. If you can punch through the bureaucracy when it's needed, you'll be able to meet initiatives. We've been shown that time and time again. So how do you do that? With courage and consideration, another Stephen Covey metric that we'll talk about in a second, or comment that we'll talk about. Being able to have these tough conversations without becoming defensive, and being able to really hear your customer and then be able to build the trust so that they understand you. Demonstrate timeline delays, and then always go down to your cost of vacancy. Yeah, but this is costing us $100,000 a year, so maybe we should put these papers aside and interview this fellow. I'm getting the wave of hands of time, so we're going to move a little quicker. Next characteristic is that they were totally well-balanced. Well, I should say pretty much well-balanced, because can you ever be balanced enough? Every tight, well-run organization that comes up with the best results really gets this point. First characteristic, balance is recruiting with process. The obstacles, obviously, it gets lopsided. And then the solution is to understand that different initiatives need a different type of balance. So in one initiative, you may need a lot of really strong recruiting talent to get to the initiative, and a little bit of process, or let's say a 60-40 split. And then in another type of recruiting event, you may need just the opposite. The key is to understand what it is you need and balance it for each specific type of recruiting. And then the worst thing, and we see this quite often when we come into an RPO situation, is there is way too much process and not enough talent, and that's the thread throughout, or vice versa. And then it's comparably. So if you have a position that is highly transactional and there's a lot of hires that you have to make you assume that it's got to be process, when in fact it's talent. So it's prejudging ahead of time what kind of balance you need. And a good way to, a good solution to that is to process map through supply chain. We've had supply chain people on board for the last 8 years. It's made a big difference in our processing. Okay, matches talent effectively. So after you know what you need, you make sure that you get it. And the obstacle to that is taking a look at your own staff and saying, maybe we don't have the talent, things are changing, maybe we don't have the right internal talent. And that's scary, because does that mean I have to lose my staff? Does that mean I have to change my staff? Does that mean more machete training? I mean, what does that mean? But being able to take a hard look at that and then understand there is other options. There's contracting, there's outsourcing, there's hiring different talent. There's different things that you can do, but really making sure that you can take a look at that effectively. So well-balanced, again, knows their internal strengths and weaknesses. Almost like, what is our maturity level as far as how balanced we are? Obstacles to that is that it's hard not to assume that you have all these strengths. It's hard not to assume that you're fully entrenched in social networking if your people are really well skilled at using LinkedIn and they do a little tweeting. But is that really the whole plan? And because things are changing and there's so many different things that are introduced, it's very difficult to understand what your real strengths and weaknesses are. Lacks introspective. So we've seen organizations that are trying to gain that. But the ones that are very introspective, open to change, open to knowing what their own strengths and weaknesses are, those are the ones to do. So the solution, do your own practice 360 on yourselves. Talk to outside suppliers, events like this, other people doing the same thing, even competitive recruiting organizations will help you figure these things out. Okay. Last, under well balanced, is use your gut instincts and metrics. And it's a combination. So we've talked a lot about metrics. We have a saying around here, numbers don't lie, emotions do. But I have yet to see a metric that can't be challenged, and I've yet to see a metric that you can't make work for you. So that's when you've got to say, well, metrics can be subjective. It was with some mathematicians over the weekend, and they were saying the same thing. We can really pretty much make anything happen with numbers. So are they important? Yes. Do they buy you credibility? Yes. But they should never take the place of a recruiter's gut instinct that I can do this or I can't do this. So obstacles to that are unmatched proof. So if my gut is telling me I think this can be done and I can't prove it with a number, should I back up? Well, if you're a seasoned pro, maybe you need to take a look at how you can find a number that does represent that. Solution, samples of past successes. I remember a time when. And talk about that. And talk to yourself about that. And talk to your team about it. And then go to your respected champions within your organization that have had the benefit of having your work, know what you can do, have seen how well you can do it, and totally understand it. Okay. This is the people science team. The guy in the yellow suit is Chuck. I had to do that too. So these initiatives are managed and executed with passion. So our first bucket is influencing using passion. It's hard to knock somebody down who feels passionate about what they're doing. It just is, right? The obstacle to that is the pessimist in the group, the guy in the back, usually finance, that is saying over and over again, yeah, but it won't work, yeah, but it won't work. But it's hard to knock down passion. So what can you do? You can align yourself with calmer personality. This is something I've seen in an organization that was in total influx. The growth was off the charts. The company was just building at a speed of light. And there was all this passion. We're going to hire all these type of knock engineers. We're just going to bang this out of the ballpark. We have customer service rolling. We're outsourcing to the Philippines. We're outsourcing. It's all these great things going on. And I was listening to this operations guy, and all finance guys were in the back, and they were saying, he'll never do it. When are they going to fire him? We've already had 4 management teams. It's very interesting. This fella was clever enough to go out and align himself with some very calm people. So you really couldn't get past the passion because the calm guys would say, to your point, and bring some credibility to the kind of outlandish passion that this fellow had about it. So align with calm personalities. Another characteristic is ready to fight for the cause. You've got to be ready to stand there and say, yeah, but this will work. Now the obstacle to that is when you say, I'm going to fight for the cause, you usually get a fight, right? So how do you do that? You don't fight. Number 1 rule with these groups is they don't finger point. I actually had somebody tell me that. They were working on a very big initiative. HR was finger pointing at training. Training's finger pointing at HR. It's going around in a circle. Ops is standing back saying, see, they're all fighting. They actually said to us, see, they're all fighting. Very interesting. The first guy who stops and listens wins. He does the bulk of the listing, is always winning. And stick to the facts. And then our last characteristic demonstrates loyalty. So what you're loyal to the company, you're loyal to the cause, and then somebody will start to challenge that a little bit, right? And then it causes you to double think a little bit. If you go back and you're honest with yourself about what your motives are, you should be in a position to kind of bolster yourself up a little bit, and then your loyalty becomes credibility. So those are our points, the basic characteristics that we're seeing from a leadership, from a headset standpoint. I'm going to turn this over to Elaine. Talk to us about technology, Elaine.
And staying along the same themes, almost everything you said, I was giggling on the side. Believe you have one more. Or are we skipping through?
We're gonna skip those because I think we're running out of time.
Okay,
great. Get this out to everybody though. Go ahead.
Yeah. So really just aligning the same kind of concepts with, and there's definitely a pleasure and a pain to technology in talent acquisition, and as we do our business and working with clients for the last 12 years in a consultative role, and even prior to that in the corporate roles that I had, one of the greatest balances was really understanding some of the best recruiters I've ever worked with had a fear of technology, and there was a concept that the technology was put in place to derail what they can accomplish as a recruiter versus enable what they could accomplish as a recruiter. And I spent most of my time in degree and background being in education. I think there's such a great moment when somebody realizes that the tools that we look at as corporations, the products that we look at, aren't truly meant to stop us from doing our jobs. They were always purchased with the decision to improve what we were trying to accomplish. How far we're able to improve is dependent on how much we're willing to embrace that technology to be an enabler. So in the characteristics of that and really thinking through, one of the key areas I see in many organizations that is just completely overlooked and oftentimes overassumed is the ability to master the basics. Mastering the basics with our own products, what we use, whether, and I look at this from truly just the basic examples, whether you use Outlook or whether you use Lotus Notes for email. Do you use Microsoft Word products? Do you prefer an Apple experience or a Mac experience over a PC experience? But the absolute basics, even down to the fundamentals of how is your computer set up in your office? Is it the focal point of your day, or is it something to the side and you get to it when you can? But some of these things can make or break the way that we spend our attention on technology and how technology can truly move to be an enabler. The obstacles, clearly, in most cases, there are many more, but time and attention, the ability to just take this on and tackle the fact that we've got technology in front of us. If we had polling questions, my first question would be, how many people have actually created, if you use Outlook, how many of you have folders and auto-filing rules engines turned on? These are features that have been in Outlook for going on 8-9 years. In many organizations, that we still have inboxes that scroll hundreds of thousands of emails, where there are so many different ways to prioritize and organize our information today. But it takes attention to stop, think about it, understand it, and play with it for the most part. The second is always a fear of change, and a fear of change and how fast technology is moving today. I love seeing what's new and next around the corner. I enjoy learning which new social platform and footprint will be out there. I was an early adopter of Foursquare and Groupon and many of these other kind of social tools and platforms that are out there. I'm using QR codes today, but I will also tell you I am overwhelmed with the amount of new things that are coming on our market and coming in the industry today. It's not just in mainstream consumer products, but really what's coming from a recruiting technology perspective as well. You highlighted the concept of using social media for recruiting. I remember the day we turned on our first career website in a corporation here in San Diego, and I was responsible for doing the HTML coding for the job codes every day. And today what's available from a cross-publication and the ability to take one opportunity and replicate it in so many different places at a push of a button or even at a thought in some cases, because some of these systems are already pre-designed to do it for you, is overwhelming. And it's a lot to absorb in the midst of our regular day. So change in organizations that we're on one product and we're moving to another. We've always done recruiting process this way and now you want me to do it a different way. There's some emotional things that we need to overcome. The solution, practical things you can do today just for yourself, refresher training. Every product or technology solution you have out there probably has a help menu in it somewhere. If not, it has a user guide somewhere. If not, there's a training manual created somewhere. It doesn't hurt to thumb through the pages. Just randomly open a page and read that chapter just to see what it says. There's just some ways that you can re-educate yourself on what's happening within the products that you have to use and the products that you get to use in your organization. Reviewing the documentation. Again, assumptions are you've been trained initially on some of these platforms. I would actually say for most organizations, it is assumed that you know the basics. You know how to use Word, Excel, PowerPoint, in some cases access databases, etc. These are becoming assumed capabilities. But going out to the internet and looking at some of the other different tutorials and help things to really get you to more than just a light user. And then the best one I can offer from a solution is always to practice. There's no reason we can't continue to look at different ways that we can evolve our products. As an example, what I've been doing recently is I've taken the review pane off of my email. One of the things as a behavioral thing is I look at it in a review, I think I've responded to it, I didn't. And the review changes the icon of my email to red, and then I forget to do it. So behaviorally, what do I have to do? I can't use the review pane. If I open an email directly, I either need to respond instantly or I need to create a task for myself and a reminder, which is easily done, to respond within a certain period of time. Just some things to do to practice to change your behavior. The next one, really formatting for preference. Almost all the products, again, in technology that you're using, and I'll go from broad applicant tracking systems, talent management systems, your HRMS application, all the way to your email, to your web browser. All of these have ability to format for your preference. What's the first thing you want to see when you're logged in or you launch the page? How do you want the page to behave? What do you want it to assume? What color preferences do you like? What visual preferences do you like? What size font do you prefer? These things can radically change the way you see technology and what you're doing with your job today. The obstacles, some products have limitations on some of these, and the real obstacle is your understanding of what you can or can't change. But the solution is to really go after making those options part of your day performance. I have the font set on my email incredibly large. I have the font set within my browsers as small. I use different monitors for different things, but there's different ways that you can work on this, and that all boils into the trial and error.
We have a question about this.
Sure.
That just came in. It seems items and folders in Outlook used to get deleted more quickly, so how does one remedy this?
Oh, well, that's a great question. Assuming that depending on your folder system and if you're on an Exchange environment, you need to understand how your folders are being stored or retained against your archive process and stored or retained against your Exchange environment. But I can tell you that in my environments, and we work within a Google Apps platform, nothing is lost in my subfolders any different than when I choose to make the decision to when to archive. So, and the beauty of archiving is it archives within the same subfolder structure. So if you set up a system search, they come up really fast. But those would be settings that you could change within your organization, or technically within your desktop platform, or based on your IT rules and requirements.
Good. We have some other questions that we'll get to at the end.
Sure. So really, rationalizing your required work. This is one of the areas, again, moving in deeper into how do we get process enablement with technology? How do you look at technology as something to help you get your job done? You have to look at the work that's required. And I will tell you, coming from the system side of this equation, I've been a recruiter. I know what it is to be in talent acquisition. My passion is around getting this technology piece right. But rationalizing what is truly required versus what is nice to have versus what do we really want is really important at an individual level, at a department level, at a function level, and at a business level. There's some times where there are required fields that it just makes no sense that they're required, but they're required because, and I will venture the guess, most of the time they're required because they're necessary for reporting. So in order to get to the statistical results we need, that information has to be entered at certain points in time. But really being able to think about what that required work is and how to get it accomplished quickly. The obstacles typically, and I've seen where products have been designed that everything's required and it can be completely overwhelming. And also not sure where to start when it comes to what's required. I've worked with a case study storyboard. I had one recruiter I had an opportunity to work with a while back who had such a fear of technology that their assistant literally did all of the work for them in the system. They printed out their email spills of the day. They would write responses back, and their assistant would then go ahead and email those responses. And then we started working through some of those behavioral shifts. We started realizing when I introduced them to the product and how the solution that they were implementing was going to change that, through a couple of clicks and a little bit of time, they realized that those emails were going to be automatic from the system, and it was a matter of check marking a couple of boxes, and they actually saved themselves a substantial amount of their time. So really just readdressing where to start. We just started with one thing. Let's just get this initial email done in the system versus everything else. And I know that a lot more resources, and specifically recruiting talent, tend to be much more aggressive and embrace technology. But at the same time, we can also be incredibly distracted with it. So really just thinking about where's the best place to start in rationalizing that. So I would say the solution is really making sure that you're aligning with the process and prioritizing for efficiency. So what is the best way to get your job done in the day? Perhaps the example might be making phone calls in the morning is the best time. So you spend the time on the phone in the morning. But during the lunch break, when candidates start answering, you spend the time updating tracking logic, but really starting to think about how you can structure your day to spend the time in the right places. And I would say the other major characteristic is you audit your results. Always be refining what you can be doing from a results perspective. Define what's the really important information, and then look for the inaccurate information. Because in many cases, a lot of our reports, the old adage, bad data in equals bad data out. So if we don't enter information in the system, we can't report on it. If we enter bad information or not real information, I'll say it, fudged information, we get fudged results. So it becomes much more difficult to prove our case for the value of the effort and energy we're putting into our jobs if we can't truly measure that through our reports. So making sure, again, that it aligns with the process and that we focus on where there are opportunities for financial impact. And financial impact comes in things like additional fees for advertisements we didn't have to run, or knowing the candidates in queue and the probability of their acceptance for offers. Knowing where we're going to have challenges in the process and being able to elevate those things out early. The line manager asks for that unrealistic candidate. What does that look like? My current storyboard is a client that has an amazing leadership structure within talent acquisition, to the degree that the recruiters were set and were verbally promised that if a manager asks for something unrealistic, they have permission and power to push back, and they will have support every time. But to really get to that line of relationship with the different audiences within recruiting to get to those valuable results. And they were able to do that because they could justify financial impact of wasted time, of lost opportunity, of missed candidate population because they had the data. Let's go to the next slide. And since this one was clearly about pleasure, wouldn't make sense not to have a slide that has a visual of pain. And the visual is negative, but the concept is a positive here. We need to voice our opportunities for improvement. As talent acquisition professionals, as recruiters, as somebody responsible in this recruiting cycle, we absolutely have to touch technology to get our job done today. I have not found a case in this market today where technology has not been at least some minor component to the entire process. And that literally boils down to, it could have been a text message via phone. A phone, I will actually say, is technology, but in this case, I'll just say true internet and computer-based technology is still required for the recruiting process today. Most college applicants don't approve email anymore. Most of them want text messages. Most of them want other types of media connections. And as we think about those audiences, we have to be able to move forward with the different types of models to get to the talent. So we have to.
I would mention too that whatever your branding message is, you have to make sure your technology ties to it.
Absolutely.
Case in point, working with a high-tech company that we are now, but their applicant tracking system is long and entailed, so they're trying to get up-and-coming great minds from MIT and some of the other high-tech organizations, and what's happening is they're pumping into a cumbersome technology, which is misrepresenting what the organization wants to be.
Absolutely, and I would say that there are so many cases, and the technology that's available today to automate recruiting is some of the best technology out there. In fact, it parallels most of the consumer product technologies. It parallels a lot of the social media platform technologies. We really are on the edge of what the rest of the market hopes to achieve when it comes to capabilities, configurations, and options. At the same time, we implement such a small percentage of what is available and capable, and we get stuck in the concept of it's painful to implement, let's stay here a while, and we don't evolve. And this is where recruiters and the users make a big difference. If you're still using the product the same way you were using the product a year ago, something is wrong in your organization. Because I can guarantee that no matter what platform or product you have in the market, there has been some kind of enhancement or improvement available, because nobody implements 100% of the product on round one. Nobody implements fully 50% of a product in round one. So there's always an opportunity for improvement. And without your voice, without you speaking up and saying, why do I have to click left, click right, turn 3 circles, and then jump just to complete this one task? You have to voice those questions. You have to voice them, and I think use all the information before this message about voicing it in a positive way, about really driving towards where that improvement can add time to your day, can add a relationship experience to a candidate, can improve the manager intake process. Those things are going to create more value for your business. And the first one being harmonizing technology needs with the business value. There tends to be a lack of ownership and budget around the technology piece. And maybe it's not a lack of ownership, but it might be a competitive nature around the budget or ownership. If I had $1 for every opportunity where there was a disconnect between what recruiting needed from capabilities and what IT thought they were offering, I wouldn't be working. I would have my own private island and my own private fleet of planes. But the reality is, it is a language barrier that we can overcome. We can overcome it by just beginning to continue to talk about what our business needs are and what that value brings. And IT has the ability to help that technology convert to what your needs are. But budget can be an issue depending on how that falls within an HR budget or whether it falls within a operations budget, etc. The solution is that it requires a partnership. And it requires a partnership with the vendor products that you have. It requires a partnership with your internal audience as well, IT, procurement, maybe beyond HR, talent management, etc. But making sure that what you're bringing in is harmonized with the rest of those efforts. The next one, aligning process with technology strengths. Many times in the past.
5-minute warning too. Just giving you a heads up. We're getting the 5-minute warning.
Okay, I got 1 minute left. Perfect on this slide. So. Aligning process with technology strengths. There was a debate I had with one of my original bosses in my first recruiting experience where I was responsible for the technology piece, and he would say process before technology, and I would say technology before process, and we would debate it for fun because we both knew we both were right. But the reality is that the technology that you have in your organization is designed to be much stronger in certain ways, and there's no reason not to stop and think if that design will enable you to be more effective. So continuously looking at the process that's been dictated. Was the process from an old way of doing things, or is the process really thinking about the strengths of the technology and leveraging a new way to do things? And the last piece, just really being able to challenge status quo. Again, your voice as a user is important. It shouldn't be silent. It shouldn't be aggressive or angry either, but it shouldn't be silent. It needs to be a voice that says, there absolutely has to be a better way to do this, and I'm sure that somebody can help me find that way to do it better.
Good. Alrighty, so we're actually running tight on time. I'm going to just introduce the group to the Recruiting Continuum. If you haven't seen this, this is the foundation of very successful recruiting initiatives. So what we've done here is gone back, looked at them. We created this actually back in 2002. And we said, why are we having so much success when the organization didn't? And then why are these other organizations that we know having so much success without any outside influence? So when we talk about should a company build it or should a company buy it, all of these factors that we talked about today are incorporated in there, and these are best practices that go either way. And the Recruiting Continuum is really the cornerstone of that. So if this is your first introduction, if you haven't seen this, this is on our website. We encourage you to take a look at that. And if you fill out the form that we're going to show you in a second, Pam will make sure to send you some links to this. But basically, this is everything that happens in recruiting, and laying it flat, looking at it as almost as a diagnosis, and then saying how well these things are all being conducted. So if you're defining and attracting and you're doing okay, if you raise your okay to great, you'll see a huge impact on the entire initiative. And the same for all the other buckets. This is just an explanation of those. And in our next webinar, we can talk a little bit more about these. It's also in the self-assessment that we'll send you. And so basically, this is actual customer who filled this out on our website, and you can see the purple is them. So they came in and graded themselves, and then they knew exactly what areas they needed to increase, and the methodology behind those was much easier to plan now that they could recognize what they can do. So you could, in fact, consider this where that company is right now, and then some of this augmentation. In this case, it was done by us, but you can actually, as an organization, say this is what we need to do, and augment some of it, or augment all of it, or do it all yourself. Either way. Again, this is something available on our website. This is an overview of filling them to reach those. The key word here is optimum. Second word, efficiencies. Optimizing those efficiencies to reach the best potential. This is our self-survey. Pretty popular. It's been used, I'm going to say, by at least 60 or 70 companies over the last 3-4 years, actually almost 4 years. And it's broken down into your planning, your advertising, your activities, and your processing. And then along the way, we incorporate what your information technology looks like. It's a good think piece. It's a personal piece that we welcome you to use. You can, so Pam, they receive this by emailing us at this address, www.peoplescience.com/assessment or assess. And you can also get us through hr.com if for some reason you lose our number. And these are our recommended readings. Google Alerts, if you're not using them, right, Elaine? Everybody's got to have Google Alerts.
Okay,
Bing
so I will
actually has
tell
some
everyone, if you have never done it before, go and set up a Google Alert on your own name, just for fun. Very easy
yeah, I
to
did
do.
that, and then I took it down. But there's so much to be gained because it really brings data to you that take your points that you're most interested in and have them brought to your desktop every day, and you get a nice blurb, tells you if you want to look at it. Bing's coming out with one. This is Stumble Upon. I'm relatively new, started it about a month ago. It's giving me even better information. I suggest you take a look. We talked about the Medici effect, old but good, highly effective people, 7 Habits of Highly Effective People. Stephen Covey gives you that good courage with consideration that you can take further along. So those are our recommended readings. We did have a couple questions. Pam, do we have a minute or two for questions, or should I be asking Kathy? For the people who submitted questions, we will be responding to you. Sorry that we didn't get to those today. I encourage you to attend the next webinar too, but we will see if we can keep this open for a little bit and get back to you. Only because we do have quite a few there. This is our upcoming an overview of Part 2, June 29th, Wednesday, June 29th. Characteristics of today's candidates, boomers through connectors. Elaine's whole family is in there. How to communicate with who and how. Talking about the relationship and how it is everything. Social networking, the good, the bad, the ugly, what you should be doing, what you don't, help you figure out what it is you should be doing and what you don't really need to waste your time on. My candidate, my customer, something I am passionate about, something I know that Elaine is passionate about. To give you an idea, our organization, to make 91 hires, spoke to 58,000 candidates in the first quarter of this year. 58,000 candidates just in the first quarter of this year. So we can give you some information about how the customer is your candidate. And influence is referral. So that'll be our upcoming webinar scheduled for June 29th. I believe that we're out of time and Kathy's going to cut us off. I'd like to thank you all for attending, and we hope that we can see you again June 29th. Again, we'll be answering the questions as they've come in. Thank you.